Well, good morning. It's good to be with you this morning, Wednesday, June 24th, and it is a beautiful day in Vail, Arizona. It's also a beautiful day where I'm coming to you from Prospect Heights, Illinois. Arlington Heights is actually, I guess, the proper term for where I'm at currently. And today we're going to talk about Abraham, the founder of the religion, actually many religions across the world today, and we're going to talk about Abram today. But first, just a couple housekeeping things. It is Wednesday. Good to see you, and I am so grateful to be with you this morning and talk about all the great stuff going on in our world and our country. So I don't know. So I try to remain fairly apolitical. As you know, apparently that's not necessarily the best, path for people. You have to take a stand about things periodically and that sort of thing, and I understand that. But there's always two sides to every debate, and but I just have to probably step in it a little bit this morning because I understand they're going after Teddy Roosevelt. Now, I don't know if you know much about Teddy Roosevelt. One of our great presidents, actually at the time, I think he was one of the youngest presidents ever elected. The previous president, was it McKinley, was killed, assassinated, or whatever. I can't remember. Anyway, but Teddy Roosevelt came into the office young. He was from the Roosevelt clan. I mean, the Roosevelts had money. They were from New York. There's actually, I think, a Netflix or an Amazon special about the Roosevelts, and you can watch the whole Roosevelt thing from Teddy Roosevelt down to FDR. This great family who've done great things for the United States. But Teddy Roosevelt is just this rugged. There's something about Teddy Roosevelt that I really, really like. I don't know if it's because he was an outdoorsman. He was a rugged, a guy that overcame some physical disabilities to end up becoming president of the United States. There's something about Roosevelt that has always resonated with me. And you can't, the great thing about Christianity is that we know that we're not perfect. The great thing about Christianity is that we still can hold on to a high ideal of what things should look like what does perfection look like. But we know that we'll never reach that because we're sinful human beings. So all of us have imperfections in our past. All of us have things that if society were to dig deep into ourselves, they would say, you're not fit to lead. And the truth is, none of us are fit to lead, but we're all we've got. I mean, if you're looking for somebody who's perfect, good luck. There's been one perfect person that has lived in this world, and he has given us a mission and a vision to what we should be doing as a church. And but other than that, we're all imperfect human beings. And so we have to fight in an imperfect world with imperfect human beings. Nobody's perfect. Nobody can live up to a great standard, whatever the standard is. Nobody can live up to that. But still, there are people that I think that we should hold up as great icons of our history. And if we're going to start destroying monuments to people who are imperfect, then there are no more monuments, right? There's no more history. There's no more past. It's just, I don't know. Maybe I'm just a little bit edgy because Teddy Roosevelt is one of my heroes. If you've ever met a great leader, somebody who is really trying to make a change for the world, there's a guy named Bill Hybels who was pastor of a church in Chicago, actually, not too far from here. I've been to his church. Willow Creek. He always says a leader is somebody says, he draws it on a chart. He says, here's where we are, and here's where we need to be, and here's why, and here's how we get there. And a leader is someone who forges that path and says, this is what we're going to do. Now, anytime you have a leader, you're going to have detractors from that leadership. You're going to have people are saying, we can't do that. That's wrong. And you're going to have people fighting you all the way. You're going to have, who was it last week? I was talking to somebody last week about backseat drivers or what is it, the quarterback, the Monday morning quarterback or whatever, the people that in rearview mirror, it's so easy to criticize, and it's always easy to criticize the leader, right? Because the leader is the one that's actually in the fight, and so if you've ever known somebody that's trying to do that, it can be very, very difficult, and it can be very, very challenging. And Teddy Roosevelt was a guy. He gave a speech. Actually, let me just see if I can find it here. He gave a speech. It was apparently a really, really long speech. But in the midst of that speech, he has this thing called the Man in the Arena. Which is just, if you've ever come across somebody who's trying to lead, just this quote is so helpful for people. But listen to what Roosevelt said. He said, "It's not the critic who counts," and so the critic is obviously somebody who's looking at the leader, and criticizing the leader. Because anytime you have a leader, you have people criticizing. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, the leader, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly and who errs. Of course he errs, right? Nobody's perfect. Who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory or defeat. And that's one of my favorite quotes from Roosevelt. Basically what he's saying is that, it's so easy to criticize the leader. It's so easy to say, well, you should have done this and this and this. I mean, we see this in politics all the time, right? But our hat should go off to the one who's actually in the arena, in the dust, fighting and clawing his way to great things, right? Because at least he's trying. At least he's trying to get a group of people from A to B, and we should honor that. And Teddy Roosevelt did some amazing things in the preservation of our land, and peace relationships between the tribes. And I mean, he was a great man. He was a great leader. We should honor him, and we shouldn't just flippantly or callously or casually pull down a statue dedicated to him simply because we think it's the right thing to do at the moment. It's maybe another reason why I don't get involved too much in some of these disputes is because it takes a long time for history to decide who is great and who's not, and who actually took us in the right direction and who actually did not take us in the right direction. And history is the best judge of a lot of these things. And I think just if all you are is a person driven by emotion or driven by the fad of the day, then those are the things that will destroy any country, right? And maybe countries should be destroyed. I'm not saying that every country will live forever, but all I'm saying is that they got under my skin a little bit with Teddy Roosevelt. So and if you don't like Teddy Roosevelt, I'm sorry. You should watch the Roosevelts or read a book about him because he was really quite a great leader. Anyway, so man, I probably going long today. We started a couple weeks ago looking at birthdays, and I looked up this morning to see if we have a birthday today. There's no birthday today. Sorry. We've got a couple coming up tomorrow, so we'll point those out. And again, the wildfires in Tucson, just crazy thing. So I hope everybody's staying safe there. We are still in the sequester of our coronavirus. Although I read yesterday, it was something that came across one of my news feeds, that from its high, the number of daily deaths that have happened from coronavirus is dropped by 90%. So that's really encouraging news. And there's also another drug treatment out there. It's a corticosteroid drug. I can't remember what the name of it is, that apparently provides really effective treatment, and they've done the clinical trials for it, and it all looks good. All they're doing now is waiting to publish the paper, but some hospitals have started to incorporate this treatment into coronavirus, and apparently it's with great effect. Some hospitals, for some reason, are waiting for the official publication. I think it's because there's just been so much politicization. Is that a word? Politicization of this whole coronavirus thing, that I think people are even afraid to believe what they read in the press, right? Or even press releases. I think even our most safest channels for communication are being corrupted in some manner. And so some doctors and hospitals are just very, very cautious, even what I think is probably a treatment that's going to be probably the treatment that's going to, I mean, until we get a cure or a vaccine, you have to do treatments. And what they had been doing in the treatment was putting on people on ventilators. Well, if you got on a ventilator, you had a 50% chance of surviving that. But this other treatment now, they're treating it as kind of more of a blood disease, and with the steroid, the treatment is much, much better. The success rate is much, much better. And so even though it may not be a perfect treatment, at least it's a better treatment than the one that we've had. So, and each day, I mean, that's what I love about the United States. Okay, I'm going to go back to this, but the United States is a nation that is willing to risk tradition, willing to fight the people who are entrenched in power in order to make change and do change better. And that's the whole idea behind this country, is that we can do change. We if you're going to find a treatment for anything, it's going to be in places where there is the ability and the freedom to be able to look at different treatments, as opposed to some economies where it all has to be top down from the government, and they're as slow as molasses. So I'm sorry if I'm getting on my soapbox here, but oh my goodness, stay listening if you will, please. I can't help it. It's just sometimes these things get under my skin, and I just have to vent a little bit, okay? So, all right, that being said, there is good news out there, and I think within a month, you're going to start seeing things just break free. One thing I heard about the 1918 flu pandemic is that after 1 year, they never did find a cure or treatment or vaccine, and they never did get herd immunity. The vaccine just kind of like disappeared, which is weird, right? But, that could happen. We could wake up tomorrow and it's like the vaccine has just kind of disappeared. I mean, not the vaccine, but the coronavirus just kind of went away, and we're like, what was that all about? So you just never know about these things. All right, so today we're gonna get into the guy. All right, let's just spend a little bit of time this morning looking at where we've come from. We are in Genesis 12. So what's happened in Genesis 1 through 11? Well, we had creation story. We had Cain and Abel, the fall of man. Then we had generations from Cain and Abel down to Noah. Then we had Noah's Ark. Then Noah, we have generations from Noah all the way down to a guy named Abram. So in the story so far, the main characters have been Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah and his family, and basically now we're getting to the guy. And when I say the guy, I mean Abram, who later, as we'll see, becomes Abraham. And Abraham is just this wandering nomad of a guy. I mean, he really, truly, and he's kind of a cad. We'll find out in the story as we read it that he's not this perfect guy. He's like, Yeah, he's like somebody who wouldn't really necessarily hold up like a Teddy Roosevelt and say he's a great guy. I mean, if there's one thing about Scripture is that God has to use imperfect people. Well, Abram is an imperfect guy, okay? He's about as imperfect as it gets. And it's all because his wife Sarai is beautiful. She must have been just stunningly attractive woman, right? I mean, because of what happens to him when he goes into Egypt. But anyway, we'll get into that story. Excuse me. Sorry. So, coronavirus. So Abram, this kind of this wandering nomad, nobody of a guy, but God comes to him and basically calls him to be a leader of a great nation, and he does become a leader of a great nation, and all the great religions that come from Abraham, the three main ones are Judaism, and then we have Christianity, and then we have Islam, which is considered to be an Abrahamic religion from a different child of Abraham than Isaac. And Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But those three religions, I'm guessing that there's probably 2 billion Christians and maybe a little bit less than that Islam. So you're looking at 4 billion people. So let's just say if you look at all the Abrahamic religions, it's 4.5 billion people, and the population of the earth is 7.5 billion people. So a little over 4 out of 7. I mean, over 50% of the world, 50% of the world follows this guy named Abram. I mean, that's just mind-boggling. It's just this guy. But monotheism, Abraham, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, it's all comes of this guy named Abraham. And he's the main character of, there's probably 2 main characters, Abraham and then his great-grandson, Joseph. But whatever it is, his progeny, Joseph, I haven't calculated it out. But those are probably the 2 main long story arcs. And then to get, so if you want to know the Old Testament, you've got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Those are the 4 patriarchs that come out of Genesis. Abraham, his son Isaac, his son Jacob, and then one of his sons Joseph. That's all you really need to know about Genesis. You have Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah, and then you have these 4. You have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. If you know those story arcs, then you know everything there is to know about Genesis, and Abraham is a major part of that story arc. So this is where it really starts to get very, very interesting and fascinating, because Abraham is just a fascinating character. And as I said yesterday, Abraham is all of us. He is an imperfect man who gets a call from God and follows God faithfully, reckoned to him as righteousness, right? Faithfully, but doesn't really know what he's doing or why he's doing it, and yet he's faithful to God. And that is basically us. We're imperfect people, but we get a calling from God to do something, and we do it. We don't execute it perfectly or faithfully, but that's what we do. So that is a long introduction. I'm sorry, but we're now gonna go into Genesis 12, and we start at Genesis 12, beginning at verse 1. The call of Abram. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the people on earth will be blessed through you." So, I mean, that's the story goes on, but this is the call of Abram, and it is this point his name is Abram. It's not Abraham yet, and the Lord had said to Abram. So the Lord comes to Abram. Remember, this is being told by Moses. So this was an oral history told to Moses that he wrote down. And it also tells Moses how the Israelites got into Egypt. But the Lord comes to Abram, just this guy, this wandering guy. He says, go from your country, your people, and your father's household into a land that I will show you. And we'll find out that Abraham travels to about 10 different locations, right? He never quite gets settled in one location where God doesn't call him to another location. If you look at the travels of Abraham, they're just all over the board. But he's basically leaving. So he's south of, he's in Ur, I believe, which is between the Tigris and the Euphrates, south of or southeast of Babylon. Babylon. Yeah. So anyway, he's in that area, and then the God tells him, go from your country, go from your people, and go from your father's household to a land I will show you. Now, you have to understand that, your people and your ancestors and the land that you occupied, all of that stuff was what rooted you to everything about life. It rooted you to your ancestors. It rooted you to the land. It rooted you to the people. I mean, it was just the land and the people were this symbiotic relationship. And God comes to Abram and says, I want you to go. I want you to pick up and I want you to leave. And you're now going to go to a different country. And what does Abram do? Well, we'll find out. But Abram follows God. But this is the promise that God has to Abram. He says, I will make you a great nation. And he does. I mean, if any promise of God has been fulfilled, it's this one. Are the Abrahamic religions a great? Today, thousands of years later, over 50% of the world's population follows Abram. These Abrahamic religions. I mean, that's kind of coming up to a great nation. He says, "I will bless you. I will make your name great." There's probably no greater name than Abraham. And you will be a blessing, and we'll find out how much the Abraham line was a blessing to the world. He's incredible blessings that came through the line of Abraham. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you, and all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So God calls Abraham, who becomes Abraham, and he says, through you, all the nations will be blessed. I'm going to give you a blessing, and then everybody else will be blessed because of you. I mean, what a great opportunity that God has given Abram to do this. But the whole point of God blessing Abram was that so he could be a blessing to the world around him. And I think sometimes we forget that. If God blesses you, it's not just because God loves you, which he does, but he blesses you so that you can be a blessing to other people. That's the whole point of this thing. This is the whole reason why God blesses Abraham, is so that he can be a blessing to other people. It's when you get the blessings of God, you don't hold on to them. When you get the blessings of God, you share them with the world around you. That's the whole reason for the blessings. And when you lose sight of that, that's where things just go south really, really quickly. And God doesn't pick perfect people by any means. He picks Abram, just this guy that he says, go. And Abram was faithful, and he goes. Let's just continue on. So Abram, this is chapter 12, verses 4 through 9. So Abram went, as the Lord had told him. And Lot, this is his nephew, went with him. Abram was 75 years old. Just think how old that is, when he set out from Haran. And he took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran. And they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. So basically, he takes all his possessions. He takes his wife. He takes his nephew Lot. He takes his possessions, all the people that he'd acquired, in these clans, right? The clan grew. You have people of influence that have become, they have wives, and they have servants, and they have children. They have children with the servants, and I've got this whole clan. And the whole clan moved together to go to Canaan. Verse 6, Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Morah at Shechem. And at that time the Canaanites were in the land. the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he went on toward the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. And then Abram set out and continued toward the Negev. So we see here that Abram is being faithful to this calling by God. He leaves this land from Haran, and he goes out towards Canaan. But before he gets there, he goes to the site of the great tree Morah at Shechem. I would love to have seen this great tree. My grandparents lived in Glendale, Arizona, and the house that they lived in was owned by one of the first mayors, if not maybe the first mayor of Glendale, Arizona. It's kind of weird how my grandfather ended up with this house, but they rented it from the mayor. They rented the upstairs, and then the mayor decided to build a different house, and my grandfather was already living there, and so he just made an offer to buy the whole house, and he bought the whole house. So my grandfather ended up living in this wonderful 2-story cottage house right near downtown Glendale. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is that there was a tree on their property that was on Glendale Avenue before they widened Glendale Avenue, and the tree actually had a name, and the name was Old General. And I think I remember my grandmother telling me about this story, but it was called Old General. It was an old tree, probably 100 years old, and was planted by somebody, probably one of the Civil War generals, and I don't know which one it would have been, but he came out somehow to Arizona and somehow ended up in Glendale and planted this tree, and the tree was called Old General. And I unfortunately have a picture of this tree, and when they widened Glendale Avenue, they had to tear out this tree, which is just a travesty in my opinion, because this tree was 100 years old, and if you go to the Alamo, you'll see an oak tree that's probably 150, 200. I mean, it's this huge oak tree that they take care of because it's an important oak tree. It's part of the Alamo, right? Well, something similar to this was on my grandparents' property. It was called Old General. Well, now we have Abram traveling to the site of the great tree of Morah at Shechem. So apparently everybody knew about this great tree in Shechem, and it was this tree called the great tree at Morah in Shechem. And I would have loved, I wish we had a picture of this. I wish I had Google Earth back 5,000 years ago to see these things, but we don't. But it must have been a well-known tree, because the writer of this, the story that's being passed down, it's like, oh yeah, we know that tree. We've heard about that tree. Somebody I know made a pilgrimage and saw that tree, and they decided to describe it. But at that time, the Canaanites were still in the land, and the Lord appeared to Abram, and he says, "To your offspring, I will give you this land." So what does Abram do? He builds an altar to the Lord. He thanks God for this promise, and he builds an altar to the Lord. And we'll find out that he builds several different altars to the Lord. Abram was a man who loved to build altars. And then from there he goes to Bethel. He pitched his tent, and there at Bethel he builds another altar and called on the name of the Lord. And then he continues towards Negev. So I think we'll leave the story here because I think I went a little bit long about Teddy Roosevelt. And for those of you that don't like Teddy Roosevelt, I'm sorry, but he was a great man in history. He flawed by every stretch of the imagination. Nobody's perfect. But I think some of the things that he represented are very, the rugged outdoor wilderness, of the United States is, produced Teddy Roosevelt. And we should, even if we end up tearing down a statue, we should never forget the great things that Teddy Roosevelt did. Going back to Teddy Roosevelt, we should be talking about Abram. But there's probably a lot of similarity between Abram and Teddy Roosevelt. Both imperfect people, both on a calling from God. Both on a calling. I don't know about Teddy Roosevelt. Probably. I don't know what his religion. I know he was religious, but I don't know how deeply rooted in his religion he was. I have to, maybe I'll do some research between now and tomorrow and figure that out. Might then not like Teddy Roosevelt. I don't know. But anyway, so we're going to leave it at that. Why don't we close in prayer? Dear God, thanks for this day. Thank you for calling Abram. And we're grateful, Lord, that he followed your call and that we are his children. And through his line, you produced your son, your progeny, and our Savior and Redeemer, Jesus. Be with us this day. Continue to guide us in all that we do. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so we'll leave it at that, and thanks for joining me today. We will get again together tomorrow on Thursday, and I won't go on my diatribe as much about Teddy Roosevelt. And have a wonderful day, and God's blessings. We will see you tomorrow.